Is Judaism a people or a religion? And what are the requirements for becoming a member of the tribe of the Jewish people? Are they cultural, are they religious, or are they both? Herb Kanan will again join us to lead our next panel to explore this vital topic.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The panel we have now is one on conversion to Judaism. Are we a people or a religion? And with us in the studio, we have Chaver Knesset Elazar Stern from the Yesh Atid Telem Party. And abroad, we have Rabbi Yaakov Bleich, the chief rabbi of Kiev in the Ukraine, and Rabbi Ari Folger, the chief rabbi of the Jewish community in Vienna. Since Chaver Knesset Stern is in the studio, I think we'll start with him.
Okay.
Chaver Knesset Stern, tell me please, in your estimation, is conversion in Israel too difficult? Should the process be made less stringent in order to enable more immigrants the opportunity to convert and become Jews?
Yeah, no doubt. The conversion in Israel, the conversion process, it's too difficult. Compared to what? Compared to too many issues. The first issue is about the reality in Israel. You know, maybe it was a miracle when our brother, sister came mainly from former Soviet Union. Many of them were even that they are grandchildren of Jewish, they not recognized according to the Jewish halacha, even though that they are ready to sacrifice their own life to defend the Jewish people. But then once we want to let them, give them the opportunity to convert, the demand is much more than the average Israeli. So we are not in the diaspora, they are already here. So the reality, if we are going to adapt the most severe way, we are bringing here the assimilation. The other issue, according to the generation, even to the biggest rabbi in Israel and the diaspora, many of them, not all of them, under these circumstances, adopted the easier way. You know, from the Rambam until Rabbi Unterman, if you want to go, or Rabbi Uziel, because once we understand it, you know, I, as a major general in the army, and as a religious guy, cannot understand, cannot agree to the situation that once one came to convert and declare, I want to be Jewish. I think that I'm Jewish, but if you want, I want to become Jewish, why no one asked him if you are ready to sacrifice your own life to defend the Jewish people? Why it's not a relevant question in the conversion process? According to my Judaism, it should be maybe the most important question there.
Let's turn to Rabbi Bleich. Rabbi Bleich, what do you think? Do you think that the conversion procedures in Israel should be made less stringent in order to welcome more converts into the people?
Let me tell you something. The Jewish people were never a proselytizing people. I understand member of Knesset Stern's concerns. I think that one of the major issues that he's dealing with is he's confusing the state of Israel and the Jewish people. You know, the Jewish people, never in the history of the Jewish people was one of the questions or the criteria to become Jewish is, are you willing to sacrifice your life for the Jewish people? It's obviously a great thing.
Only was
a very great thing. And it was never part of the criteria. And the criteria are uniform. There's no such thing as, oh, this guy will make it easier, that guy will make it harder, because at that point we have lost the entire basis for conversion, which is the basis of someone living according to the Torah. Nowhere does it say that living in the state of Israel, the Rambam doesn't say if you live in the state of Israel, if you're willing to sacrifice your life, then we make it easier. So the idea is that there's a uniform approach. The approach is someone that accepts upon himself the laws of the Torah. This is how the Jewish people became a people, by saying Na'aseh v'nishma. And not because they were living in Israel. They weren't living in Israel at the time. They were living in the diaspora, obviously. They were still in the desert. He doesn't want to go to Ruth, but you can go to Ruth, you can go to the Rambam, you can go wherever you want. There still has to be a uniform policy which is based on Shulchan Aruch, which is based on Jewish law. And Jewish law doesn't change when you come to Israel to make it easier. If we want the Jewish people to retain that aspect of Jewish people, That's what's important. Now, Israel has another thing called citizenship, and they have an army. All these things are not relevant to the issue of conversion.
But Rabbi Belech, let me ask you a question though. I mean, do you not see an absurdity in a situation where you have a soldier who was killed fighting for the Jewish state? He feels himself Jewish, but he can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery?
Do I see an absurdity in it? I think that there has to be, again, there are laws and there are laws. I think that this person should get the highest honors possible as someone who fought and gave his life for the Jewish people. No question about it. The question is, what are those honors? Those honors are to be buried in the Jewish cemetery, so then we're desecrating Jewish law with that. If we shall make a special honorary cemetery for the greatest honors on Mount Herzl, make a separate section for people that sacrificed their lives for the state of Israel. I'm not saying these people aren't deserving of honor. They're deserving of the greatest honor. The question is, what are you doing to honor them? That's it. And for us to decide that we're going to move things around because we want to honor this person. Listen, the righteous Gentiles that saved Jews during World War II also deserve the greatest honors. These are people that saved Jewish lives. And they also put their lives in danger. Many of them were killed for saving Jewish lives and for protecting Jewish lives. We can make them honorary Jews, but we can't make them Jews.
Chaver Knesset Stern, how do you answer that? There just can't be any
I think that
flexibility
no one, even Rabbi Bleich, don't keep all the orders, all the mitzvot. So no doubt
Thanks for the compliment.
you are living there. You are not here in Israel. There is no doubt, even according to the Rambam, about mitzvat Yishuv Eretz Israel. So no one keeps all the 613 mitzvot. Okay? So they came here and they thought, we are ready to do everything. We want to become a part of the Jewish people, as Rabbi Bleich said, okay? So, are you wear tzitzit? And if not, even Rabbi Bleich, he is living there and I respect it. I think he does a great job there, okay? To serve the Jewish people. But of course, the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Israel, he's not there. So if they are say, okay, I want to כיבוד הורים, I believe in the God, like the Rambam said, מודיעים אותו מקצת מצוות קלות ומקצת מצוות חמורות, ואין מעריכים בדבר. So I don't want to compare Jewish here and Jewish there, okay? I want only to say that people, that we are not convince them to come, but they decided that they want to go through the process of conversion. Why we have to put so many difficulties in front of them, and we know that they are not in Kiev, that there are many communities there. Because our grandchildren, they are going to get married with them. Because they are here, they serve, they work in the high-tech, in every place. So there is no one option, become Jewish or not. Become Jewish, conversion, or assimilation. This is what we are doing. And I am really worried about the future of Israel as a Jewish state, because if we don't let them become Jewish, say, okay, we are here, it's good enough for us. The assimilation will be here, because they are not not people who think, it's going to damage our life in Israel. Unfortunately, there are so many, so they can become a good Israeli with not conversion.
Rabbi Fogel, where do you stand on this? Do you think there should be some flexibility here in the conversion process in Israel, taking into account the realities of 400,000 non-halachically Jewish Russian speakers who've come since 1990?
Well, I think that Chaver Knesset Stern, who, first of all, I would like to greet him for the wonderful thing that we meet again. Chaver Knesset Stern is making a number of assumptions which we need to test whether they're correct. One assumption he has made explicitly regarding EU standards. What are the demands in order for a conversion to be halachically valid, and have they shifted, and if so, why and how? That's an explicit assumption. There are also other assumptions, however, which we need to look at, and we also need to examine the assumption that I just mentioned. For example, Chaver Knesset Stern assumes that if we're going to make conversion standards easier, there will be a lot more candidates, and that the real the bottleneck is the conversion standards. Well, is that so? We have data that contradicts that. When the Marach HaGiyur was founded, the intention was that would suddenly convert a lot more people in Israel under the aegis of the Rabbanut. But the numbers that were hoped for did not come. It seems like they're, unfortunately, many of those people that Chaver Knesset Stern is mentioning, that we're talking about, that you mentioned, are not particularly interested
Why?
in the religious aspect. Not all of them, God forbid. We know many of them are, but many of them are not. And we need to respect. People make their choices. Some
Yeah.
people want to be halachically Jewish, and some people make other choices in their lives. That's an assumption to test. Another assumption that Chaver Knesset Stern alluded to is that if we're not going to be converting these people easily, then we will have a major assimilation problem. We're talking about roughly, the estimates vary massively, but you mentioned roughly 400,000 citizens of the state of Israel that came under the law of return to Israel, or were born in Israel to parents who came under the law of return, and who are not halachically Jewish, that this will cause a problem of assimilation. Now, here's the problem. Not the problem, or rather maybe the solution, I don't know. A well-published doctoral candidate at an Israeli university by the name of Rabbi Eli Fisher has published data that shows that there is different fertility rates between different demographic groups in the state of Israel, like anywhere else, which is not surprising, and that particular demographic group has two demographic markers going in a sense against them. One thing is their fertility rate is lower, and the other one, what's going for the solution but against the problem persisting, is that there is a certain percentage that converts, disproportionately so. We're talking about women in childbearing age, so that the problem resolves itself by two ways over time. Perhaps we're trying to solve a problem that A, doesn't want our solution, and B, is solving itself partly over time on its own. So there are a number of assumptions here that need to be tested. And last but not least, we come back to the story of the conversion standards. I'd like to bring your attention to a letter by Chief Rabbi Herzog, who was the first Chief Rabbi of the State of Israel. At the establishment of the state, he was the Chief Rabbi. After the War of Independence, he wrote a letter to Rabbi what's his name? Rabbi Breisch in Zurich. And the topic was conversion standards, particularly regarding people who had been hidden by righteous Gentiles during World War II, and fell in love with someone in the family, and then made Aliyah or wanted to make Aliyah, and suddenly have all these non-Jewish spouses. And the question was exactly the source which Chaver Knesset Stern quoted, namely that we should not, once we've gone through a minimal conversion program, we shouldn't insist too much, we shouldn't turn people away, in a sense. We should try to, at some point, we pick the people up. And Rabbi Herzog very insightfully argued against the application of that principle in our society. Essentially, what we have is a contradiction between certain sources. If you test them by today's societal standards, it didn't used to be a contradiction. It only became a contradiction because people live differently nowadays than then. And Chief Rabbi Herzog points out that it used to be, if you converted to Judaism, you went to live in a Jewish quarter, and mimetically you started observing Judaism. There was no tension between the decision to become Jewish and not yet knowing what to do on the one hand, and on the other hand, the expectation that you would become a Torah observant Jew. That broke down in the modern period, and hence, Chief Rabbi Herzog argues, and that is the generally accepted argument, that because the Talmud and in its wake the Shulchan Aruch and all those other sources insist that Kabbalat Ol Mitzvot, accepting the yoke of the commandments, is an inherent part of conversion. Therefore, we must be realistic. We must understand that in a world in which the vast majority of Jews are not strictly observant, that just saying I am Jewish or I want to be Jewish isn't going to turn someone into someone who lives the religious
Rabbi
life.
Fogel,
But-
understood. Unfortunately, we have to move on. We only have another 4 minutes. So I just want to ask another question to Chaver Knesset Stern. There's now talk, a discussion about changing the law of return, the Chok HaShvut,
Yeah.
which allows for the non-Jewish descendants, grandchildren of a Jew, to make Aliyah to come to Israel. Do you think that there's room to change that? Should this be changed because of the?
I don't recommend to open the law of return, okay? But I want Rabbi Folger and also Rabbi Blair to understand the reality here that every day we enjoy another 15 new babies, newborn, they are not recognized as Jewish. You know, among us here in Herzliya, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, you name it, okay? And all of them, they are Zera Israel. They are not someone from Gentile who came and say, I want to become Jewish. All of them, they have grandparents, Jewish, according to the halacha. So if we still think that we have to adapt the most severe way, you know, it's not an assumption. You know, I agree with Rabbi Folger, but not who is the guilty that knows so many wants to become Jewish, go through even the easier conversion process. But, you know, when I founded it in the army, till now, we have only in the army, and it was approved by Rabbi Yosef. I went to Rabbi Yosef before I began, close to 13,000. You know how many kids they already have? So what I think, according to, unfortunately, I wasn't surprised that this initiative was by Smotrich, which is very, unfortunately, too extremist. If he wants to open it, so go to the fourth generation. You know, not to the second, to the fourth. But what I prefer, to leave the law of return in the current situation.
Rabbi Bleich, what do you think about that, changing the law of return?
I think that the law of return has no basis in Jewish law. It was taken from the Nuremberg laws because of the way Jews are persecuted. I think that today the law is obsolete and being abused by grandchildren of people that are coming without their grandparents. There should at least have been something that when they come with that live grandparent who's Jewish, okay, the Chok HaNechadim is what's causing more assimilation. And I just want to point out that the ideas that Chaver Knesset Stern are coming with have been tried by the reform and conservative movements in the West to try and make the laws of conversion easier, and they thought that that way they'll have more Jews, and it only led to
It's
more
not allowed to
assimilation.
make it easier. It's to give every chief rabbi of towns in Israel the right to convert. And you know that according
That's
to the
bureaucratic.
halacha, every rabbi can establish a Beit Din.
100%.
Yeah?
Rabbi
That I
Fogel?
agree with. You're talking
Okay,
about
yeah, this was my initiative.
Rabbi Fogel, we have another minute. Let me just give you the last word here and ask you this question. Chaver Knesset Stern was talking about the reality in Israel, that we have to take into account the reality in Israel. Don't you think that there is something to that? I mean, things have changed. We have a real dynamic situation here. My grandkids are going to be going into the army with the grandkids of people who are not Jewish because they can't convert. What's going to happen? How do you deal with that reality?
I live with that reality since I'm a rabbi, because the communities in which I have served and continue to serve have not only Jews who are members of the community, but also non-Jews who are somehow related, who are part of the larger ecosystem. So I know what you're talking about. Let me suggest a more fruitful solution, building off something that Chaver Knesset Stern wants. The idea of having more Batei Din, but with standards. The Rabbinical Council of America, for example, has instituted a network of Batei Din with uniform standards, and they realize that what really matters, if you want to have enough conversions, is good service, good accompaniment. That's what we need.
100%.
There is a Chok HaShvut. We have a responsibility to go and reach out to these people and make a greater involvement in traditional life to be more attractive, something that's
Rabbi,
obvious. And
That's our next panel.
Thank you, Rabbi Fogel. That has to be for the next panel. Unfortunately, our time is up.
We can
Thank
agree.
you both, and thank you, Chaver Knesset Stern.
Our next panel should be about reforming the rabbinical system in Israel,
Okay. Thank you.
Toda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
making it user-friendly.
Bye. Thanks.